Okay. So, again, it's a fundamental building block area. Now, can you get rewarded as an early stage technology investor? The sector multiples and the margin profile are challenges. The limited universe of buyers are challenges, but the markets are big enough that you can yield large revenue streams with best-in-class innovation, and ultimately you always get rewarded if you solve a hard problem well and it results in a large revenue stream, even if the multiples aren't particularly robust.
So from what we've seen on the photonics side is we do see quite a few companies coming in claiming to have a fully integrated solution. Most of the time it is kind of a hybrid solution, but what ends up getting them ultimately is the fact of the extensibility of Ethernet. So maybe right now it's really difficult to come up with a 25 gigabit PHY, but we are seeing a lot of semiconductor companies come to us with exactly that sort of goal of exceeding a 25 gigabit. So if you're in that market and you're looking at a photonics that's trying to come down to, let's say 100 gigabits versus another company that says we can extend Ethernet up to 100 gigabits, probably the safer play and the one that's easier to back is the semiconductor company, because that historically Ethernet has been moving up that chain, and photonics, it's very difficult for them to economically scale down to the slower speeds that we would see in a data center, certainly within the rack.
It's the only comment that I'd make is if you look inside of some fairly progressive system level products like Compass out of Israel and some next gen products by local Ethernet switching vendors, they're using full mesh VCSEL backplanes to deliver multi-terabit to each individual line card slot. And so again, it's just an example or a case study where there is a role for optics to play in high performance communications, even within embedded systems more than CU. In fact, the folks at the CU in Boulder just had a fairly substantial technology breakthrough of doing on-chip photonic interconnect on the die level, because there's a lot of challenges with copper traces, as everybody knows, to get silicon to the next level. And so, it's far into the future, but some very exciting measured results where they're implementing photonics at chip scale on the die. So it's an area to watch. It's an area to watch.
And I think and I think that's right. And I think a lot of the problems that we're seeing for carriers and data centers, they would almost be fairly mundane problems, right? So you think of, well, we can increase the density of our routers and switches pretty dramatically, but then you can't get the optical signals in and out, right? It's faceplate density, right? What do you do? If you look at VCSELs, for example, the cabling costs are enormously big, right? And the size and the power. So maybe there's another way to do that that uses a different type of technology where you could, if you could reduce cabling costs and complexity, it's a big deal. So, so I think that there are some interesting optical technologies that are going to be able to really solve these problems, and they don't always have to be fully integrated silicon photonics. I mean, that'll happen at some point, but they can be some incremental technologies that can solve these specific problems, and they're still super interesting.
Moving up one layer in the stack, or 2 layers in the stack, optical switches in the data center are a very interesting area. In my opinion, the ability to connect all these racks together through optical switches and have a control plane that's separate, that's managing this interconnect is quite interesting. And it's an area that I think at least one company will be successful. Many of you have invested in optical switching. We don't have the kind of resources at Archimedes to invest in those kinds of things, but I think that's a very interesting area. So in general, I think there's a lot of work still to be done in optical, both short reach and long reach, and at the switching layer. So if you're thinking about something in that space, it's a good space in my opinion.
One of the things I feel that the past few decades now, because we're past the 1920s, 30s, we're sort of becoming technologies here forever, and it looks like this today. We were first IBM mainframes with dumb clients, then we went out to thick clients, and then we're back out into the cloud, and things are being wanting to push out to a data center. And I feel the thin clients now are going to be things like IoT and wearables. I'll let you go on this one because you got a GoPro shirt with you. But is wearables, is that, you know, the next big thing? Because ALAN Networks for the Internet of Things just closed 14.5 mil in Series B with Cisco. Everything is spelled without the vowels, and then received 7.5 mil in Series A from Cisco. So are we kind of looking at something that's just coming our way? This is the start. And also what's, you know, the fun wearable stuff that you're seeing out there, and I'm sure there's a huge diversity in it.
It's probably a good question for Camby's.
Okay. All right, since I'm not sitting in that seat, I'll take it first. So we're actually extremely enthusiastic on Internet of Things. We sort of think of it as the next generation of computing. We've actually gone through multiple generations of computing. If you go back to as old as I am, and I've been around a while since we did mainframe computing, and then mini computers, and then personal computers, and then of course centralized computing in the web era, and now we're in the mobile computing era. We're transitioning, very early stages, but we're transitioning from mobile computing to context computing. And what that means is the ability to connect objects to people to the cloud. So instead of having people connected to the cloud, you now have objects, people, and the cloud interacting according to a context and meaning for that interaction. And the number of applications will be absolutely enormous. I mean, we can talk about hundreds of applications already that have begun to be deployed in Major League Baseball. The introduction of iBeacons by Apple in June was a major milestone, just like the introduction of the iPhone in 2007 brought on the mobile computing era. We think that the introduction of iBeacons by Apple in 2013 will bring on context computing into our generation, and that's a huge area of innovation, and I can't even begin to predict the number of applications, but we're extremely enthusiastic about that space. Not from a connectivity space, but from the standpoint of context interactions and what that means in both the use cases and platforms as a service and infrastructure as a service.
Nobody else into wearables at all.
I think well, I was glad to hear about Isla. You know, Dave Friedman, the CEO, was at a company. I invested in Internet of Things in 2008. Dave ran kind of BD there, and our first application for this company was specialized Wi-Fi silicon to connect 8 and 16-bit microcontrollers to the internet. It's pretty cool. And our first application was with a company called Radio Thermostat Company. And they were going to connect the thermostat to the internet. This seemed like a brilliant idea.
$3 billion.
Unfortunately, it was not that company that connected thermostats to the internet, which is an interesting lesson. You know, an interesting lesson in timing. You know, that was pre-iPhone, so the ability connecting things. I think the bigger point is right. Connecting things to the internet is the easy part. Figuring out then what to do with all of that information, data, platform, figuring out how people leverage it, you know, is where the value is going to be created. And also, you know, the thought that these are thin clients, I think is somewhat misleading, right? This has two 1 gigahertz processors in it. It has, you know, 32 gig of storage. Like, this is a pretty serious computing device, and I think with all kinds of, you know, very fascinating sensors, right? CMOS sensor, accelerometer, gyroscope, GPS, you know, Bluetooth. So I think there's going to be tremendous innovation leveraging the horsepower and the sensor capability in these devices, not looking at them as sort of you know, thin terminals just for, you know, snapping photos and selfies.
Yeah, I would 100% agree that the age of mobile computing doesn't mean that we went to thin computing at the edge. We actually went to thick computing at the edge. We moved intelligence to the edge of the network. The role of the cloud, and I'm not talking about the enterprise cloud, but the consumer cloud, is actually a co-processor, if you will. It's actually providing, for example, Siri is a co-processor for the actual application that's running here. And the model is that intelligence is moving closer and closer to the edge, and with Internet of Things, it now moves into billions of individual transactions that are managed by context computing. So think of computers moving everywhere and intelligence moving everywhere, not thin client edge.
Security's become a big word with NSA, Snowden, all of that. Where are we at as far as opportunities within the security market? A lot of you have a security portfolio. Do you see anything that's changed as a result of public policy, public behavior, requirements change as a result of it? What would you target in the security market today?
So, from our standpoint, so I think security could be 10 panels on its own, right? There are a lot of topics in security, and that's one of the things that's interesting about it. It's a very fragmented market, which makes it, it's a big market, but it's fragmented, which makes it attractive but difficult at the same time. Some of the things that we're looking at that I think are just a few trends that are interesting. So one would be the transition from security as a compliance checkbox to something that has high levels of efficacy, and that's really how we like to think about it. What can you do that has low false positives, something that is sort of automatic? And I think the notion that large customers want to have things that they can deal with themselves and have security analysts, and small companies have more of a desire for automated solutions. I don't know that that's completely true. I think there's a desire across all of our customer base to have solutions that are more automated. So that is, that's clearly a trend that we see, even for large customers, to have things that you can plug in that are going to have high levels of efficacy. I think endpoint, well, let me back up for a minute. I think in security, being able to detect is one thing, but then being able to enforce is another. FireEye was one of our portfolio companies, and they've certainly done a good job. And of course, they went out and acquired Mandiant, and part of that was to solve the endpoint and enforcement part of the equation for them. So I think those are really two trends that we're seeing: the ability to make things easier and more automatic, and the ability not only to detect but also to enforce.
Security is a market that has fascinated me for many, many years. Actually, Juniper acquired a company that I was an early investor in called NetScreen many, many years ago. If I try and look forward, where the opportunities are, so much of security is predicated on there being a stable physical network topology with which to police and enforce, and that construct, frankly, doesn't make much sense moving forward when you have compute virtualized, storage virtualized, the network virtualized, and you have this porous perimeter with all kinds of smartphones. And so, again, it's an area where we have a large market, fragmented market, lots of existing solutions, which are being fundamentally disrupted by these global megatrends. And it's going to have to be some going back to first principles to think about how you define security. I actually think that it will shift from being about protecting the network to protecting the information elements at their most basic level, individual documents and so forth. You see a lot of progress on data leakage protection, but that's a rearview mirror looking thing, and so there's going to have to be a different view. Right now there's a lot of tension in the IT industry about the boundary between the enterprise network and SaaS providers and data leakage across that boundary. Whole collections of companies that are building gateways and so forth to try and do centralized policy enforcement. I don't know why that really makes much sense, because people just go around the public or the enterprise policies with their smartphones on a routine basis. So it's an area that I continue to track pretty closely.
I'm sorry, Angel, I'm just going to jump in a quick second because we're into our Q&A time and I don't want to take time away from the audience. Although you can roll your answer in the next one somehow, Angel, and finish your thought. But did you have a question?
Yes. Every so often, we hear about can't-miss technologies with tremendous promise and potential. As an example, 2008 was to be the year of 10G-based T, and still isn't here yet, according to the Del Oro analysts. SDN may be in that same position. The general question is, what do you folks do about companies that you've invested in to pursue one of these can't-miss technology that seems to be in a holding pattern, either not being a commercial success or being delayed till the year next year, the year after, whatever? Do you keep funding them, or do you just let them die? And how do you handle that situation?
It's a
Sorry
question
to
for
put
the
you on the
pros.
seat, but that's, but as Lance knows, for 40 years, that's what I do.
Repeat the question for people in the back.
The question was, what do you do, basically it sounds like, what do you do for companies you invest in where you're betting on a market trend happening, yet you are too early?
And if you don't want to make a general comment.
Like my Internet of Things example,
Take
right?
SDN, well, the Internet of Things is even further out, but SDN's been here for a while. Arpit Chashpur says, yeah, there's great progress. I don't agree at all. I have the exact opposite feeling. What do you do if you invest in an SDN company and for years, there's not any money coming in? What do? Do you keep funding them or you pull the plug?
I'm happy to give you some thoughts on
Well,
that.
just whatever, either general
Alex, go
thoughts or
ahead.
on a specific
I don't mean to-
market. You
Yeah,
could
I
pick
mean-
IoT, you could pick SDN, I don't really care what.
At some point, right, you're attempting to solve a problem or you're attempting to enter a market, and often, VCs will tell you we're great at predicting markets and market timing. We're actually not that great at it.
There are very few people that are.
It's very difficult. There are many factors that are out of your control. So you have a couple of options, pivot into, try and, it depends if you have passion about, this market is happening and it's fundamentally sound and there's real business drivers to it, and we're just early, that you can withstand. You can slow your pace of spending, you can work with the thought leading customers, and hopefully that these things are going to trickle down into the broader market, over time. I mean, if your market just doesn't, if you bet on something that just doesn't happen and there is no market for it, shame on us, right? We should be doing better due diligence than betting on markets that just don't happen. Sometimes at Series A, you just can't tell. So it's an interesting dynamic. We've all had companies that have gone sideways, and you really just try and ride it out as best you can, given there's a ticking clock, right, of your cash balance minus your, monthly burn rate.
Have you personally ever your company ever pulled the plug on one side of shots?
I think we've all had companies, and anyone who's been doing investments for a long time have had companies that go out of business and return $0. That's just an unfortunate fact of life.
Sometimes we're not pulling the plug, sometimes other entities or the market is pulling the plug. Sometimes companies just fail.
I say always fire the CEO first and then.
Yeah, but Candace, what are your views on Sesame Seeds and Burger King and all
What are
the
you talking
important
about?
issues of the Silicon Valley TV show?
Unfortunately,
Which of you guys wants to come in the sedan chair next year?
Unfortunately, I don't watch much TV, so I can't comment on TV shows.
I gave up on HBO.
I'd like to come back to Alan. It's Alan, right?
Yes, son.
I'd like to come back to your question because it's a serious question. It deserves a
Thank you.
thoughtful answer.
Thank you.
So, look, doing early stage technology investing is a hazardous way to try and make a living. Okay, you're bound to make mistakes. But if you're not making any mistakes, you're not doing your job because it's a risk business.
Obviously.
And what you can do is try and be thoughtful on how you assess market, team, and technology. Those are the pillars of any decision. And there are some rules of thumb to try and avoid self-inflicted wounds, like piling in on the second and third wave innovators after there's been a great success that's come and armies of people are trying to come and repeat, right? But you asked what happens when things aren't going well, how do you make a decision? If you are proactive and you try and help create opportunity as opposed to just sit back and pass judgment, then by the time that it's clear it's not tracking, you and the founders of the company are going to look at each other and you're going to say, yeah, we know the market didn't happen, we got blindsided by competition, or the market happened and it stalled. I invested in a company called Oneta many years ago, which is building the world's first dynamic optical amplifier for metro applications. And they went from 0 to 17 million in revenue in 2 years. And I was on cloud 9.
That's great. That's
And then the revenue completely stopped. The customers just stopped buying. All right, 2002 happened, right? And anybody that's been around the valley has been through ups and downs. The important thing is just to try again. To say, okay, we did the best I can. What can we take away from it so we don't make the same mistakes again? And actually, there's
So
evidence.
that's the main takeaway, you have to learn from whatever mistake.
You have to learn. And actually, there's a lot of academic research that says that a founder of a company that failed has 100% chance of being more successful than somebody that never founded a company in the past, in their next endeavor. A founder of a company that succeeded has 200% chance better odds of succeeding in their next endeavor than somebody that never tried. And the important thing is just to keep trying. Just to keep trying.
Fair enough.
Fair enough?
Yeah, let somebody else ask.
Sure.
We got a question, one more question.
So, following along with something, kind of a throwaway comment you just had about armies of people piling on, to the first successful one. With all the buzzwords and, the buzzword bingo of SDN and SDS, what kind of concepts are you constantly being pitched at lately that you just look at this and say, oh no, not this again?
SDN.
Well played.
Security, a lot of security. Oh my God. Another FlashBots, being the Heroku for big data, being those are.
There are some companies, SDN and security.
Yeah, yeah. Buzzword bingo, we definitely play. in our meetings.
The big themes that I'm seeing, big data is something you hear about in almost every business dimension is trying to have some intelligent use of data. I think that's totally appropriate because we're in a period where the world is being instrumented and everything that can be measured is in the process of being measured, and we don't yet know what to do with it. Right? There's a lot of people focusing on IT operations management infrastructure software. A lot of money's gone into this category because venture investors have been emboldened by the success of Splunk and ServiceNow and a number of others. So that's getting a bit busy. As Brian said, security is a red hot topic because people are emboldened by FireEye and a long collection of other success cases. But where I'm seeing the most interesting things actually are at the boundary between electrical engineering, computer science, and other fields that are ripe for a technology refresh cycle. Because there's an opportunity by pulling interdisciplinary teams together to have unique insights. Right? And so that's kind of where I've been focusing more of my energies.
Question? In the,
Yeah. Do you see open source as changing the dynamic, creating barriers, or altering the risk equation? Where do you think value can be sustained and is worth incubating and not taken out of any use by, the elephant rolling over?
I think open source is very real. It's a big threat to entrenched companies. I'm not going to mention names. And therefore, it's something that they need to pay attention to. And I think it will be driven by customers, the data center customers, the telecom customers will continue to drive open source. And it's a big thing. And it's the democratization of software, of the ability to start new companies. It's so much easier now to start a company because so much software can be implemented from open source repositories. So it's a huge trend, and it's going to be with us for many years, and more power to it. It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think the tricky thing when you think about open source as a business, right? You are running a business based on some type of open source project. Is one, venture capitalists tend not to like services businesses, right? Where revenue scales linearly with headcount, and many open source companies, have services as their leading offering. And two, how do you very carefully mind the boundary between what's in open source and what's on the other side of the paywall? and how do you manage your community, and how do you manage what features go in and on which side of that paywall, is very, very tricky and requires, outstanding product management, deep understanding of, your constituents, your community, to the extent that they have one. Many projects are using open source as a customer acquisition vehicle, not because there is actually a vibrant community, right? So it depends a lot on where in the stack. But setting that line and thinking about how you build an actual software business, not a service business around open source, is extremely tricky. Some people have done it, but it's very challenging.
Actually, with that thought, we'll have to close. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.